Hello and welcome. In this video I am taking my micro digger and we're in the woods and we have that kind of quite a big pile of soil to move. So the people that own the woods asked me if I'd use my digger, and of course, because this is where my bees are. So we've got the day on the digger, and they didn't hold out much hope for the little Chinese digger. But by the end of this job, they were so pleased with it, they kind of asked me to leave it there for a few more weeks so they can get on and get a few other little jobs done. So I think that says a lot about it, really. With this job, though, what I did notice was that you spend an awful lot of time on the digger. It's noisy, but you spend an awful lot of time you're always doing something. So even though we only had that little dumper to load, I'd load it up in such a short space of time, but then the whole time they're running off and dumping it, I'm still clearing up, moving around, moving soil nearer so that when the dumper comes back I can load it quicker and stuff. There's quite a lot of thinking involved, and you'll see in this point of view my hands are always moving. I'm not entirely sure what the movements are actually doing, but I seem to be achieving what I set out to achieve. So, bear in mind, it's quite obvious, I've never had any formal training or any training at all. I've just kind of jumped on this micro digger and just got on with it. And kind of taught myself. So I know I do things probably not the way everyone else does, but still, nonetheless. So I'm going to time lapse some of this. I'm going to, just kind of let the video do its thing, and you can sit back and enjoy the joys of a Chinese digger doing what it does best. So thanks for watching. Stick around, and I'll catch you a little bit later on. So yeah, this is the end of the day. It was a good day. I kind of, every time I drive a digger, I learn something new or I get a little bit more fluid at it, and yeah, it's really good. I mean, this wasn't a paid for job. Like, I keep my bees in this woodland. So the forest owner asked me, because he'd allowed someone to dump the soil, because they're always after soil, because we're filling ditches up, as you know from previous videos. This is where all my soil has been. So they're always after soil, but someone dumped it in kind of quite an inconvenient place. So yeah, help with the micro digger has really kind of done the job. So yeah, so I cut the sound halfway through and changed the music because, mate, this is the one problem with the digger, is the noise. It is so damn noisy. But you know, it is what it is. It's done everything I've asked of this digger. He's always done it. So I'm very happy with this Chinese digger so far. So yeah, anyway, thank you for watching. These are very strange videos. I never quite know. I don't really plan the videos too well. I just kind of go, oh, I'm digging today, and turn the GoPro on. So yeah, they're not possibly A grade or even E grade, but whatever. I try and share you what my life's like and the content that comes along, and this is kind of what we do. So anyway, thanks for watching. Please make sure you like, share, subscribe, give me the thumbs up and all that jazz, and I'll catch you all in the next video. Ciao for now.